Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading back way back to 16th century Italy. Think vibrant city-states, amazing art, incredible science, but underneath all that, constant, often really brutal struggles for power. It was, well, a pretty wild time. Fortunes changed fast, and leaders really had to know the game to survive. And right in the middle of this, you have Niccolò Machiavelli. He was deeply involved in Florentine politics, a diplomat, historian, and of course an author. The reason we're talking about him is his most famous book, maybe infamous is the better word, The Prince. This little book for like 500 years has caused arguments, shock, fascination. It's definitely one of the most controversial and influential political writings ever. So today our mission is to really get into how to rule. Lessons from The Prince by Machiavelli. Is it a handbook for tyrants? A cold look at real politic? Or maybe just misunderstood. Let's try and unpack it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to really get the prince, you have to understand Machiavelli's own world first. Florence, his city, was just constantly unstable politically. He saw power won, held on to desperately, and then often lost, sometimes violently. He wasn't just watching from afar either. He was a top diplomat for the Florentine Republic for years. Saw how things worked, up close courts, deals, wars. But then the Medici family came back into power, and boom! His whole life changed. He lost his job, was thrown in prison, even tortured apparently, and then exiled out to his country estate. And it's there, in exile, feeling sidelined, probably desperate to get back in the game, that he writes The Prince. He even dedicated it to Lorenzo de' Medici, the guy in charge. Then was it genuine advice? Or maybe a calculated move, like, hey, look what I know about power, hire me back. We still debate that. But definitely his own harsh experiences with power, they're baked into every single page of that book.
You can really feel that lived experience, can't you? It reads less like some abstract philosophy on ideal government and more like a shockingly practical manual. So the core question he's tackling, it wasn't really about how leaders should rule in some perfect world, right? It was more about how they actually gain and keep power in the messy reality he knew.
Exactly. He just strips away all the fancy ideas about divine right or being inherently good or even conventional morality. He wasn't interested in abstract justice. His focus, results, effective government, stability for the state. That's it. And he gets really specific. He talks about different kinds of rulers, those who inherit power versus those who grab it. Then he gives this very practical, sometimes, let's be honest, chilling advice on things like conquering new places, keeping order, handling betrayals.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts.
Right. The mechanics of power, unvarnished, not how things ought to be, but how they are. This is basically what we now call realpolitik, focusing on practical needs and national interest over ideology or ethics.
Okay, and those unvarnished mechanics lead straight to some of his most, let's say, memorable advice, like the whole fear versus love thing. We've all heard that quote, or versions of it. But the interesting part isn't just the choice. It's the reasoning behind it. And maybe even more importantly, the bit people often forget.
He was incredibly direct about it. He wrote, basically, it is much safer to be feared than loved if you have to choose one. And his logic, which is quite fascinating, was that love is, fickle. People are bound by gratitude, maybe, but when their own self-interest kicks in, especially in a crisis, they'll break that bond easily. Fear, though, fear is based on the dread of punishment. And that, he thought, is a much more reliable motivator. People hesitate to cross someone they fear. But, this is the crucial part you mentioned, the bit often missed. While fear is useful, hatred is deadly for a ruler. He warns explicitly, never be hated, don't seize property arbitrarily, don't mess with people's families. Fear keeps people in line, but hatred breeds conspiracies, rebellion. It guarantees your downfall eventually.
Ah, okay. So it's not just be scary. It's be feared, but respected enough not to be despised. Calculated deterrence, not just random cruelty.
Precisely. Control through the anticipation of consequences, yes. But avoid actions that make people actively want to destroy you.
So calculated power. Which brings us to another idea often tied to Machiavelli, even if he didn't say it exactly like this. The ends justify the means. How does that play out in The Prince?
Right. He never uses that exact phrase, but you can definitely see the underlying idea throughout the book. He wasn't necessarily saying go be evil. It was more like he was observing political life and saying, look, sometimes actions that seem morally wrong, like cruelty or deception, might actually lead to a better outcome for the state as a whole, like bringing peace or stability. If that's the end, a stable, secure state, then an effective leader, in his view, might have to use means that wouldn't be acceptable in, say, private life. Think about his line. A prince never lacks legitimate reasons to break his promise. Sounds terrible, right? Deeply cynical. But if you connect it to his worldview, he's saying that in the ruthless arena of politics, always sticking to your word or conventional morals can actually be a fatal weakness. Your enemies won't play by those rules. So leaders face these really hard choices. Sometimes they might need to do things considered bad for the greater good, for the survival of the state itself. That's the core of what people call Machiavellianism today, that cold, calculating focus on effectiveness, sometimes setting morality aside.
It really does paint a stark picture of leadership. No romance there at all. What does that tell us about how Machiavelli saw power itself? And to really get how he thought a leader could pull off these effective outcomes, he uses two key concepts, virtù and fortuna. They sound kind of grand, but they mean something very specific for him.
Oh, absolutely central. And virtue is probably the most misunderstood. It's not virtue like being good or religious, not at all. For Machiavelli, virtue is this potent mix of things: strength, skill, boldness, intelligence, the ability to adapt, decisiveness. It's the personal quality that allows a leader to impose their will on events, to act effectively. Think of someone like Caesar Borgia, who Machiavelli actually admired for his virtue, his ruthlessness, but also his skill in seizing opportunities and crushing enemies to build his state. It's about shaping your destiny, not just reacting.
Being proactive, having that drive and skill. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Fortuna is basically fortune, luck. But it's more than just good or bad luck hitting you randomly. It represents the unpredictable chaos of the world, right? The things you can't control. Sudden events, shifting circumstances, just sheer randomness that can wreck even the best plans. Machiavelli uses this famous image of a raging river. Fortuna is the flood that can just sweep everything away. But a leader with virtù, they don't just stand there and drown. They build dams, they dig canals, they prepare, they use their skill and foresight to manage the impact of fortune, even if they can't control the river itself.
You need the skill, the virtù to handle the luck, the fortuna. You need both.
Exactly. You need enough virtù to recognize and seize opportunities presented by fortuna, and also to defend against its blows. A great leader for Machiavelli masters this interplay.
That's a powerful idea. The leader as this engineer against chaos. Which leads us 500 years on to the big question. So what does this all mean now? How are these Renaissance ideas still kicking around today?
It's pretty striking how relevant they remain. I mean, think about it. Leaders today, whether in politics or business or anywhere else, are still judged largely on their effectiveness, right? On the results they deliver.
True. Performance matters.
And politicians. They absolutely still grapple with that fear versus love thing, making unpopular decisions for what they see as the greater good. That's a constant tension. You find the prince being read and discussed not just in history classes, but in boardrooms, military strategy sessions, political campaigns.
Why do you think that is, especially in, say, business?
Well, perhaps because CEOs, like princes, operate in competitive environments. They need to maintain control over their state, the company. They make tough calls that prioritize the organization's health, sometimes over individual feelings. The parallels are there, even if the context is different. And this really brings up that core question again, the one each generation has to answer for itself. Is this book immoral? Is it a guide to being unethical? Or is it just brutally honest about how power works, about certain aspects of human nature? Is it forcing us to look at truths we'd maybe rather not see?
And that's the uncomfortable edge it still has, isn't it? And the man himself, Machiavelli.
Yeah.
He died in 1527. Kind of ironic, he never actually got back the political power he wrote about so shrewdly.
Yeah, he never regained that influence in Florence.
But his book, his ideas, wow, they certainly outlasted him. The prince got banned by the church. Dictators were accused of following it. It was condemned for centuries.
Burned even. Blamed for all sorts of things.
Yet it just stuck around. Always there, whispering these difficult lessons about power to anyone willing to listen. Because maybe the difficult truth it forces us to confront about how to rule is that power isn't always pretty. Leadership isn't always moral in the simple sense. But maybe those who really understand the reality of it all, the human drives, the unpredictable nature of fortune, maybe they're the ones best equipped to actually navigate it, perhaps even to rule effectively.
That certainly makes you think.
It does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Machiavelli's The Prince. And maybe we can leave you, our listener, with one last thought from Machiavelli himself. It kind of sums up a lot of this. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are. Something to chew on. Until next time, stay sharp and stay curious.